Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. Hope you enjoy. Slave Empires Are Obsolete, written by JCB 112. In a ruined palace I sit, adorned in gold and fine regalia, with symbols of gods, of empires and kingdoms decorated the halls of those facades that crumble. Alone I sit atop this throne of finery and silk, of glitter and gold. Atop the mighty imperial throne world I gaze, down into the chasms of a dark, desolate city. The gold matters not now, the symbols of gods worthless without faith. The crests of mighty empires and kingdoms once conquered underfoot mean nothing when set against a new epoch dominated by a single name: humanity. Whatever had existed no longer bears weight. Whatever now exists crawls forward on borrowed time. The age of humanity is upon us all. And if old conventions are still upheld, then it is humanity who shall set the terms of our fate. We had once been the dominant power, who ruled our fiefdoms, duchies, and kingdoms. We manipulated the likes of our fellow imperial powers, and we dominated the galaxy for the good of the crown and people. Our people, that is. From atop space-borne habitats we watched as our subjects toiled and slaved. We were once mighty. We were once dominant. We held the rights to life itself, millions and billions toiling underfoot, so that we may rise steadily to the stars. Academics, scientists, engineers, and the like had begged and begged for the so-called advancement and progression. Yet we all knew what it was they truly begged for: power. For knowledge is power, and power is sacred. Power is to be held in the hands of the few, the worthy, the chosen. The proliferation of knowledge leading to the proliferation of power. Unacceptable, intolerable, and ultimately unnecessary. For we had the advantage of time and strength to force our will onto the stars without the use of unnecessary industry. Met all these academics, the scientists, the engineers we needed, and from within the ranks of our own working nobility. So toil our slaves went, collared and shackled and chipped and lashed. And so the wheels turned round and round. The fires of industry, of commerce and trade, constantly lit by the lives of the meek. And that's how it was, how it should have been, for that's how it worked for centuries and millennia. Every empire across every quadrant, save for one lonesome patch of sky. It was there that the planets were too barren. It was there that we encountered no life for 10,000 light years in any direction. It was here that our ambitions stopped, for we required life-bearing worlds to form the basis of our great empire, to facilitate the growth and expansion of our thralls and slaves, for the construction of habitats and ships requiring the induction of millions more educated laborers, and, as a result, the increase of the ranks for the working nobility. Something that must be done in moderation, should they acquire the taste for a higher station. And so we expanded around the dead patch of space, until one day we stopped, halted by a single system. The system held a single habitable world. It was a verdant, lush forest with seas and prime beaches, a perfect place to expand our empire. We entered the system, primed with ships brimming with colonists and slaves alike, new nobles and their families ready to carve out a small chunk of space for themselves and their clan, defended by the ships of the imperial core worlds. Yet the ships would never make their destination. Not a single warning had been issued, not a word uttered, nor a declaration of intent. For where there had been a fleet, now sat a single, massive object. It occupied the space the fleet had once taken, its volume and mass beyond all rhyme or reason, larger than the great imperial defense stations above the core worlds, larger than even the god chariots of the Emperor himself. It sat motionless and lifeless, oblivious to the damage and destruction it had inflicted. For hours and hours we watched, until suddenly light and an explosion of activity. The craft ignored the verdant garden world, heading instead for the system's sun. Hundreds of thousands of ships emerged from its belly, tearing and gnawing at every celestial body. They had constructed what would have taken our laborers centuries to do in the span of a single month. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. And yet, more of the unthinkable was yet to unfold. As we readied our invasion forces for a retaliatory strike, the fleet that we had assumed was entirely destroyed had simply imparted into existence within the same system. In it, the nobles and crew were safe, and they told us the many impossible tales of their month in limbo. They told us of the humans, of their culturally backwards yet technologically sophisticated ways. They told us of their lack of a hyperdrive, instead relying on a different system entirely, an entire reason behind their survival. It was a displacement drive. Slower, less efficient, but safer. Any objects within its area of effect would switch places if the objects did inadvertently overlap. This is what saved the fleet, and this is what had limited humanity to the small bubble of expansion in an otherwise larger galaxy. We eventually made contact with these humans, humoring their envoy, a small, sniveling thing that barely wet my waistline with its diminutive height. The envoy, however, brought along an offer so bizarre that I honestly considered rejecting it right then and there. They offered us an apology. They offered us reparations, paid in resources and other precious materials that were worth the colonization fleet 10 times over. They offered us the entire system sans the celestial bodies that they had just removed. And finally, they extended us the strangest, most bizarre offer in recorded history. They would divide the galaxy alongside us. Any system that was useless to us, lacking habitable worlds, lacking life-bearing terraformable planetoids, would be laid claim by the humans. In exchange, any system with life-bearing worlds would automatically be laid claim by us, even if the humans discovered it first. The Emperor rejected the offer, pushing the humans further into a humiliating agreement. In addition to the terms, the humans were to pay an extended restitution fee for the loss of the fleet, paid by a transaction account that was for every non-life-bearing system they claimed. They would automatically pay us a fixed sum of resources. The humans accepted, which at first we assumed would have sealed their fate. But in actuality, it had been our fates that were sealed. This balance of power would continue for centuries, the humans carving out strange sections of the galactic map, snaking their way through the star system and cluster, whilst we filled each life-bearing world with our slaves and nobility. Yet, the balance of powers could not last. Whilst we benefited greatly from the direct injection of human resources and crystalloids into our coffers, we had cared not to look into the means by which this was being accomplished. So preoccupied with our own affairs and the affairs of our fellow powers that the humans became an afterthought. They existed between bountiful life-bearing systems, keeping to themselves and maintaining their end of the deal. They weren't a threat, or so we had assumed. One by one, our fellow empires would begin to falter. It wasn't a war of succession that was doing this, nor was it some other form of palace coup or insurrection. No, their markets were collapsing. Yet this incident was not without prior warning. For decades now, spies had noted an increase in the abundance of rare goods on the black market, and the sheer price disparity that slowly began to creep in. It began with minor products, space parts, consumer goods. Then it ramped up in diversity, from water purifiers to atmospheric stabilizers, all the while maximizing availability, all while maintaining an incredible standard of quality, a standard of quality far beyond the capabilities of any local industry. It didn't take long before the nobles realized what was happening, but before they could react, it was too late. The demand for local goods had plummeted when the news of the black market's reliability and overabundance reached critical mass. Goods that once cost an entire annual salary now set one back by a day's worth of wages. Some goods were even given out for free. Confusion rocked the markets of our allies and enemies alike before a certain pattern started to emerge as our spies brought back these so-called black market pennywares. Its design was unmistakably human in nature. Outrage filled our courts as we marched our way into the halls of our great allies, only to find them perfectly adorned and untouched. The palaces and villas were left entirely alone, even as the crisis continued. The slave rebellion never really precipitated, at least not in the manner that we'd always imagined and planned for. There was no final last stand between the loyalist guardsmen and the defective thralls. No angry mob ripping and tearing at the nobility. The slaves, alongside much of the general peasantry, had simply stopped listening. And when it came to bringing them back in line, even the most stubborn of platoons dared not rile up a crowd of defecting millions, especially if their own friends, families, and loved ones were defecting as well. On many of these worlds, new structures were erected. Entire cities formed around them with designs that were unmistakably human in nature. Yet many of these structures were imbued with the architectures pulled straight from the ruined histories of many of our thralls' forgotten pasts. The slaves were attempting to rule themselves now, and many of their current rulers traced their descent to the missing slaves that the fateful encountered centuries ago. They were now calling themselves the Free States, a pathetic farce of civilization where the cattle attempted to steer themselves. Throughout this entire venture, nobody even questioned what had become of our slaves on the colonization fleet that had preceded the talks with the humans. Nobody really cared to question such a triviality, as the lives of slaves were but acceptable losses to be tallied alongside ruined farmed equipment or a broken pneumatic drill. It was clear now what their fates had been all those centuries ago. It was clear now what the humans had been planning, scheming for all these years. But we were not deterred. Whilst our allies and enemies were faltering and breaking apart at the seams, they were but minor secondary powers compared to our dominance of the galaxy. Our military, strengthened by years of overflowing coffers, now took to the stars once more, its target, Earth. But as we rocketed our way towards their home through hyperspace, we were yanked out, our ships sputtering into darkness, as we would soon see firsthand what it was the humans had been doing with all those worthless worlds that we'd ceded to them years ago. They constructed structures beyond what we imagined was possible, engineering feats that would require the induction of entire worlds worth of citizens to be educated and inducted into the working nobility. It didn't make sense, and what's more, the fact that we still remained alive didn't make sense either. If they had the capacity to pull us out of hyperspace, then surely they would have decimated our fleets as well. But that wasn't the end of it. Soon enough, every single screen and PA system would spring to life. The same diminutive human from centuries ago appeared in front of us, sitting calmly behind a desk, the flag of Earth government slouching from a flagpole in the background. "This is the United Nations Central Command. We have received your declaration of war. However, Earth still remains the same. We do not wish for war. We do not want war, nor do we wish to wage it. We will not be responsible for another catastrophic loss of life, nor will we willingly stand by as morally objectionable atrocities continue needlessly. We have made our intentions known for centuries. Recent events have simply been the logical impetus of our stated goals. In addition, as the conditions of creation of a fair war requires both parties to be at near equivalent strengths, lest it be reclassified as a war of domination, it is Earth's moral and ethical interests to reject your declaration of war. As a result, no aggressive actions resulting in long-term damage to life shall be committed by Earth and Earth-affiliated forces. However, the forceful seizure of property and war material is considered legal and ethically tolerable if the opposing party continues to act in a demonstrable and verifiable bad faith. That is all. Yet it wasn't. We shouted, kicked, screamed at the humans to face us directly. The humiliation we felt that day was intolerable, a fate even worse than losing an all-out war. The human regarded our request and continued to lecture us. Warfare is not the true test of a civilization's competence. The test is measured in endurance, longevity, and the careful balance between the collective integrity of ideological values alongside practical consideration of economic industrial forces that facilitate said civilization. Your test did not begin when you met us. No, your test began millennia ago when you first reached for the stars. We are not a vindictive people. We are not the arbiters of some cosmic justice. What we are a people who are simply wish to act as all civilization should, with maturity and reason. You may interpret this as you wish. However, understand that our intents shall remain the same. We will now return all of you to your homeworld. Please hold. We were all returned to the Imperial throne world on a single ship, a damned slave ship at that. The humans claimed that it was a matter of simple space efficiency. I knew what it was. They were enjoying this humiliation. Set back by the loss of our grand fleet, we remained undeterred. If we couldn't take the fight to humanity, then we would take the fight to the recently established Free States. The reconstruction efforts took centuries. What remained of our slave populace that the Free States hadn't extricated in that night worked tirelessly to fulfill our vision. A second Grand Fleet, smaller than the first, but still very much capable of action. We sent this fleet out towards the worlds of our former allies, and we were met with complete annihilation. The Free States had done the impossible. Taking cues from humanity, they had industrialized beyond any of our wildest predictions. They had prepared for our invasion, and they had even developed technologies beyond our capabilities. We lost many of our worlds after that humiliating defeat. This time, it was a confluence of radical nobles and slave leaders who formulated new systems of governance, whilst the Free States adopted humanity's democratic traditions. These new breakaway states, the aptly named Union of Free Imperial Worlds, were to adapt to a strange constitutional monarchy. The conspiring nobility became figureheads whilst democracy reigned beneath them. One by one, they left, until finally only the Imperial throne world remained. In a ruined palace, I sit. Atop my head rests an empty crown. In front of me gathers an audience consisting of my fellow Rallians, scattered amongst the overwhelming majority of Valorians and humans. I address them as I do every day. My name is Emperor Yila Solevus, Pararoria, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye might and despair. We are here, and we will not be forgotten. But instead of bowing, they take pictures and videos, some chuckling, some talking, none paying me my due respects. It was what I needed to tolerate to cover the costs of maintenance on my great palace. The tour fare was 99 credits per patron, after all. End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and patrons. Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Parky, It's Difficult to Pronounce, Lord Azrakul, and Arcadian.